Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Debating the Queen's speech in Parliament, we've got two former MPs here with us to discuss what was in it and what wasn't. In our fantasy PMQs, we'll also talk to the Labour front bencher about mental health. And as wags and mortal enemies, Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy battle it out in court, we'll look back at some of the fiercest political rivalries. That's after your news with Rosie. Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister's chaired the first Cabinet Committee to try to tackle the cost of living crisis amid warnings Britain's on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation told GB News the government's existing support package of £22 billion doesn't go far enough.
I think it's extraordinary that they are saying it's fine, everything's OK, we'll wait till the autumn. Because for people at the very sharpest end of this, they are missing, essentials now. They're getting into debt now. Their health is getting hammered now. Their mental health is getting eroded by that constant anxiety of how on earth am I going to feed the family and keep things going.
Millions of renters living in unsafe conditions should have their homes improved under major housing reform. The Levelling Up Secretary announced the new Renters Reform Bill will be extended to nearly 4.5 million households. Well, the plans will help tenants living in damp, unsafe and cold homes and also protect them from eviction notices without reason. Michael Gove also announced an overhaul to planning permission, which could see neighbours voting on home developments, including extensions on their street. The Foreign Secretary says the UK will not shy away from taking action over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Liz Truss says proposals put forward by the EU would take the country backwards and cause more checks, paperwork and disruption. The Prime Minister's warned the situation is very serious, with claims under EU proposals that trading could worsen and everyday items would disappear from shops in Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson has arrived in Stockholm to meet Sweden's Prime Minister as the country considers joining NATO. Well, Mr Johnson's also going to visit Finland later today. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a re-evaluation in the Nordic countries. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond if they join the military alliance. Professor Mark Weller told GB News it could antagonise Russia.
It is quite a momentous and risky decision for the rest of Europe for this to happen, because it does sort of tighten the noose a little bit around Russia. This sense that the Russians, that President Putin has had, that he is being surrounded by NATO, although not really true, is now likely to be reinforced.
In Ukraine, new drone footage shows a Russian tank being destroyed in the Kharkiv region as the country pushes a counter-offensive in the north. Ukraine's Ministry of Defence claims the attack was carried out on Russia's most advanced tank. The UK military intelligence says Ukraine has successfully struck Russian air defences and resupplied vessels with drones. The US House of Representatives has approved more than £33 billion more military aid for Ukraine. A journalist been killed while reporting on a raid by Israeli security forces in the West Bank. Broadcaster Al Jazeera says their reporter, Shireen Abu Akleh, had been shot deliberately by Israeli forces in the city of Jenin. Israel's military says there's a possibility reporters were hit by shots fired by Palestinian gunmen. Face masks will no longer be mandatory in airports and on flights in Europe from Monday next week. That's the new recommendation from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the EU's Aviation Safety Agency. Airlines, though, have been told to encourage passengers to wear face masks on flights to or from countries where they're still required on public transport. Donald Trump could be allowed to rejoin the social media site Twitter. The platform permanently suspended the former US president in January of last year, citing risk of further incitement of violence following riots in Washington. Well, the Tesla CEO Elon Musk agreed a £34.5 billion takeover bid with the Twitter board last month and said Donald Trump being banned was a huge mistake.
It alienated a large part of the country and did not ultimately result in Donald Trump not having a voice. He is now going to be on Truth Social, as will a large part of the right in the United States. And so I think this could end up being, frankly, worse.
One British ticket holder has won the £184 million Euromillion jackpot. They've become the biggest ever national lottery winner in the UK. They're now worth more than the combined wealth of footballers Harry Kane and Paul Pogba. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, it's a Wednesday. MPs are in the Commons right now, but today there is no PMQs. That won't stop us here on The Briefing, though. We've two former Westminster MPs to discuss their fantasy PMQs. It's Mental Health Awareness Week. We'll have Labour frontbencher Andrew Gwynn, who has spoken out about his own struggles. He'll be here with me in the studio. And as WAGs Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy fight it out in court, we look at some of the most vicious political rivalries with The Sun on Sunday's political editor, David Wooding. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Yes, it's Wednesday at noon, so you'll probably be expecting Prime Minister's questions. But after yesterday's state opening of Parliament, 6 days are now allocated to debate the contents of the Queen's speech. That's why today we on GB News have Fantasy PMQs, where we're joined by two former members of Parliament. Today, I'm joined by the fantastic James Frith, former Labour MP for Bury North, and the equally fantastic Jerry Hayes, former Conservative MP for Harlow. Welcome to you both. Jerry, I'm going to start with you because you have made it to the studio because you're in London. Let's start on the cost of living, the big issue that is facing all of us. We know people are hurting. There's new research out, it seems, every day with new figures. Research out today says a further 1.5 million households, will be in a situation where their food, heating and lighting bills will outstrip their disposable income. Prime Minister's hinting help might be on the way, but also says we can't spend our way out of this.
Well, you're going to have to, because people are really hurting. This is not, well, do we have a takeaway curry this week? It's whether we can heat the house or whether we can feed the children. And you've got pensioners, and of course they're on fixed incomes, who are in difficulty. And the people most in need, in other words, those on benefits, are going to have their benefits go up by 3%, by the end of the year, inflation 10%, and heating bills could be £2,000 a year extra. It's as serious as that. Now, I could trot out the party line and say £22 billion. Yes, wonderful, great. But they need help at the moment. I'm sure it's going to be done, but why all this faffing around? Why not just say, yes, this is perhaps a windfall tax on, I agree with Labour. Yes, I would, but so do the energy companies as well. They say it's not going to stop investment at all. All right, a lot of them have lost a lot of money in the Russian arena. But nevertheless, it has got to be dealt with, and it's got to be dealt with quickly.
Very clear. James, over to you in Bury. Nice to see you again. Since Jerry didn't pull the government line, let me have a go. The Cabinet Committee are looking at how help can be provided. Things like MOTs having to be done less regularly, perhaps some reductions in childcare if you cut the ratio, or increase the ratio of staff to children. Every little helps.
This has been 12 years in the making, I think, and the government's response always seems to be about lowering people's standards and dialing down expectations of what ordinary life, everyday life looks and feels like for people I represented. Jerry's obviously enjoyed some freedom. Now he's no longer having to take the line. I agree with much of what he has said. The government needs to respond not by committee, for goodness sake, but by executive order to give the economy and ordinary working people some pain relief, some economic pain relief. And I think it's shameless how tin-ear the government has been to date on this point. There is an immediate opportunity to take money from the excessive profits, the unexpected and excessive profits of the energy companies, who themselves have indicated that investment would continue and that they have, as they put it, too much cash to know what to do with. So the answers are there. And to see the Queen's speech yesterday introduce the concept of a cost of living crisis being a target of this government, and then all the bills that followed having no relationship with that circumstance. So we've got a cost of living crisis in our communities, and we're living still with a Prime Minister who I'm afraid we're paying the cost of lying crisis with as well.
I'm sure the Prime Minister would dispute that, but I want to move on. I'm going to stick with you, James, just so I don't swivel about so much. Just looking at the Queen's speech, I'm going to take the issue of planning. One of the many things that surprised me when I was a Member of Parliament was whenever any building was proposed, housing, schools, whatever, everybody was against it. Now, the government are going to allow neighbours to hold referendums on extensions, conversions, conservatories, as well as house building. They also have this target of building 300,000 homes. They're going to struggle, aren't they? But how do you square that circle? We need to build more. Nobody wants it in their backyard.
Well, you don't, I'm afraid, square that circle. And Michael Gove has said this morning that he does not expect to hit the target in his government's manifesto of those homes year in, year out. There is a housing crisis. I think this is playing to a very core base of Conservative voters. The idea that you can, in fact, level up by outsourcing decisions around planning and building. The problem that we have to date is actually that the government misleads local authority areas and the general population about what they expect from local authorities in terms of housing targets. The answer to that isn't to have street referendum. The answer to that is actually to provide the capabilities, the capacity, the local services that are needed to support an introduction of new housing or housing stock, or indeed the improvement of existing housing stock. In Bury, we continue to fight against government-mandated targets that don't recognise Bury has the least amount of brownfield site available in Greater Manchester, and also doesn't take into account the last 2 years of the pandemic and the change in focus for working from home and the nature of local economy now.
OK, Jerry, do you remember when you were an MP, was planning as much of a,
Oh, yes.
a nightmare back
Oh,
then?
yes. It's like the poll tax. And before the poll tax, it was the rates. Everyone was moaning, we've got to change it. It was always, why is an Irish family of 6 with 2 colour television sets paying exactly the same rates as a little old lady who's a pensioner? Disgusting. We must change it. And we did. And my God, didn't we mess it up? And then planning decisions. Now, as you know, MPs cannot get involved. And if you tell them that, they go completely berserk. The key to all of this is not just housing, not just building houses, it's affordable houses. Because people on decent wages outside of London will always get their foot on the property ladder. Young professionals in London just can't really, unless you're a banker. So what we should be looking at is affordable houses, how our kids can afford to live in the areas where they grow up. And that seems to be ignored. Now, the government has always, Tory government's always been against council housing. I think as long as it's properly managed, as long as the receipts from council house sales, and this is the problem we had in the 1990s, 1980s, was that the receipts didn't go into building further houses. It was taken by the Treasury. If we could extend the right to buy, as been suggested by the Prime Minister, but the receipts go into building affordable housing, it might just work. But affordable housing is the key.
I'm going to stick with you.
OK.
To avoid the swivelling again.
Otherwise, you'd be whizzing around.
I'll get dizzy.
Yeah.
You lost your Harlow seat in that Labour landslide of 1997. So you were witness to the decline of a government.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to just sort of pick your historical brain about whether you see any danger signs now that you witnessed then. Are there any similarities?
The comparison is that John Major was a thoroughly decent, honourable man. I'm afraid the Prime Minister, of course, if he was here, would deny it. He is not as honourable as John Major and certainly not decent. That, I think, cuts through to the electorate and is beginning to cut through to Conservative backbenchers after the local elections. You could see there was the back to basics thing, which was badly spun. John Major actually wasn't talking about morals. Politicians should never talk about morals because trousers fall down when that happens. It was about the basics and tractors. I mean, well, there we go. It's before the watershed. We can't talk about tractors. Indeed. But so, you can see it feels like the fall of the Roman Empire. And it's all very well to say, well, this is new government. Tories have been in since, 2010. A lot of the problems, and I was a great supporter of the coalition, I was a great supporter of David Cameron, because I think he really did care and wanted to change things for the better. At the moment, you've got a government who seems really out of touch, backbenchers who just want to cheer at any silly old thing, and realise that the Red Wall, we've seen it all before. I was a Red Waller in 1983. It was a Labour stronghold. I wasn't expected to win, and I held it for 14 years, and then people got back to their tribal positions. And that's what I suspect might happen.
Do you still vote Tory? You've been very critical of your party.
Oh, yeah, I can't vote any other way. But I was always critical of my party when I was in... I always was. I led some massive rebellions because I thought, I've got here by accident. It's not my job to come on your shows and sort of trot out the Tory line. My job, as it was James's job, is to represent my people and try and give them a better life, which is not always easy.
No. I could never remember the line. I was never very good at that line interview. James... you wrote an article following the local elections last week, and you were. I thought it was a very straight article. Actually, you said that progress had been made by Labour, but Keir Starmer now needs to resolve outstanding issues to address across the many communities he seeks to inspire. Like what?
Well, in Bury North, we have a strong Asian and Kashmiri, British Pakistani heritage community, and they look to hear some international commitments from Keir. They look to hear about a position on Kashmir, on Palestine, and I hope very much to welcome Keir to Bury North, to be able to give him the reception that my friends and some of my family, in fact, in Bury South have given him with the Jewish community. I think he was rewarded handsomely for his finest form to date in repairing the damage between the Labour Party and the Jewish community. We saw that in both Barnet and in Bury South, the North Manchester and Greater Manchester Jewish community turning Labour and turning back towards Labour, crucially. I think Keir needs to take that, what I called a sort of athleticism on the issue, and apply that to communities like the one I mentioned in Bury North that I want to represent again in Parliament. But I also want to see more energy, perhaps even sometimes a little bit more emotion and a bit more anger. You know, what clearly inspires him to want to be Prime Minister hasn't yet quite connected to the great populace, essentially. And I almost want him to find himself in a fight. And I think, I don't mean physical fight, but I think his response this week to the Beergate allegations, that was brave. It was also quite an emotive call on his part. And I just hope, it pays off. I hope it's high risk, and he clearly believes he didn't break the rules. And from what I've read, I don't believe he did. But I think that emotional connection is what's been missing. I think I said to you last week on your show about the need to emotionally connect rather than just explain to people. People are sick and tired of sort of technical or technocratic politics, managerial politics. And the Labour Party, I'm afraid, we haven't done nearly enough to spell out an exciting vision that captivates people's imagination, that propels people out to vote for us. And we saw that in turnout. In Manchester and Fallowfield, student population, 15% turnout as low as for the local elections, and an average of 1/3. That's pretty dire, even if the results were what I called in that article muddled. There was a bit for everyone, maybe not enough for anyone.
James Frith, thanks for your straight talking. Jerry, thanks for your straight talking. It's far better, isn't it, our fantasy PMQs and the real deal. Thank you both. In a moment, we'll be talking about mental health support with Shadow Public Health Minister Andrew Gwynn. He has spoken openly about his own struggles. Back in a minute.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
This week is Mental Health Awareness Week, with the focus being on loneliness. Joining me now in the studio is Andrew Gwynn, the Labour MP and Shadow Public Health Minister. Hello, nice to see you again. You have been open about your own mental health. How are you?
I'm really good. I think when we last spoke, I said that once I got the right medication, and I've been taking that for some time, I woke up feeling normal. And I'm here feeling normal. So it's good. Thank you.
That's really good to hear. Obviously, there's no one solution. Different solutions work for different people. That's your solution. The medication is what gets you through.
Yeah. It is. And for some people, they just need an arm around them and a bit of support. Some people will need all kinds of therapies. Some people will need medication. And some people will need a combination of those things. The one thing I think that's really important in Mental Health Week is to try and normalise mental ill health. You know, nobody thinks twice about, oh, I've got a cold or I've got a broken arm, or whether it's your physical health. You just take it as a given. Your mental health, people think, oh, that's a bit odd. And actually, we need to break down that stigma. A lot of it's gone. We've done a lot of work in that area. But the more people normalise mental ill health, the better it is for everybody.
The theme of this year's Mental Health Awareness Week is the impact of loneliness. Now, people who look at Parliament and politics, and obviously, you know, opposite, both parties throw brickbats at each other, but internally they think, well, it looks, you know, quite, I'm sure it's quite comradely, but it's not a normal workplace by any, or a normal job.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel lonely in politics?
It's how you define lonely, Gloria. I've got some great friends across all parties, and that's something that doesn't come out when you're watching Parliament on TV and you see us shouting at each other and having fierce debates and disagreeing profoundly on some issues. But I've got friends across the political spectrum because we're all in the same job together and we're all going through very similar experiences. So I'm not lonely in terms of having a pool of friends to support me, to enjoy time with. I think where the loneliness comes in, and this is probably true for MPs who have families and who represent seats far out of London, is that from Monday to Thursday, I really miss my family. And when my children were growing up, I missed out on a lot of their growing up because I was in London Monday to Thursday. So am I lonely? No. But do I miss things? Yes, I do.
Yeah, good. On our breakfast programme this morning with Eamon and Isabel, the Health Minister, the Government Minister, Gillian Keegan, was talking this morning, setting out proposals to give people greater control over their treatment, more dignity in care, reduce the use of hospital care for autistic people and those with learning disabilities. You would welcome that?
Oh, absolutely. And look, the Mental Health Act needs massive overhaul. It's chronically out of date. It's not fit for purpose. It's not working. So the mental health legislation needs to be refreshed. Of course, you're not going to succeed in those aims unless you tackle the workforce problems. And what we've seen across the NHS is that the workforce is dwindling at a time where we need more nurses, we need more doctors, we need more support staff. But that is increasingly true of the mental health world. What we've said is that we would seek over the lifetime of the next Parliament to get 8,500 more mental health practitioners into the community, into schools, so that people would have access to mental health services, open hubs in every community. That's the kind of step change we need to see. And we'll be pushing the government to make sure that in their own plans, they've got this, this workforce plan as part of their legislation, because without it, we can have all the great headlines. It's not going to happen. We need to really ensure that mental health is no longer a Cinderella service.
But they might say to you, well, that sounds great, but how are you going to pay for it?
Well, we've set out how we're going to pay for it, and there's a package of measures from removing some of the tax loopholes for private equity companies, right the way through to removing VAT on private schools. What we're saying is that we've got a package. It has to be workforce related. We have to ensure that we have that support in the communities. And once we do that, and in schools and these open hubs in the communities, we're offering access to people who right now are struggling and can't get through the front door of their GP to be diagnosed. And if they're lucky enough to get through the front door of the GP and get diagnosed, can't then access the mental health services because the waiting lists are too long. That's the crunch here. We've got to get the workforce sorted out, and we've got to get investment in proper community services.
And you just misspoke. I think what you meant to say, instead of remove VAT on private schools, remove the charitable status.
We would move. That's right. The VAT
just in case
status.
anyone was wondering, I knew what you meant.
Yeah.
James Frith, we just spoke to him. He was our colleague. He lost his seat very narrowly at the last general election during that sort of meltdown for Labour. He wrote a piece in the Times last week saying these results don't bestow Sir Keir Starmer with a stardom destined for number 10. He conceded progress was made, but he said more's needed to be done in areas that I used to represent, that you represent, that James lives in.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment. Look, we had some very good results in parts of the country. You know, Westminster, for the first time in that London borough's history, is Labour-controlled. Places like Worthing and, you know, even new councils like Cumberland, very good results for Labour. But in some of the heartland seats, the challenges are still there. Look, Keir has made huge progress in the last 2 years, massive progress when you consider where we were in 2019. But we've still got a long way to go. And people that put their trust in the Conservatives in 2019 are really angry with the Conservatives, but they're not yet at the place where they think, you know what, we're going to support the Labour Party because the Labour Party is on our side. We've still got some convincing to do. I am, you know, up for that challenge. I think Sir Keir is up for that challenge. I think we will get there, but it's always going to be a long haul to get us back to the position that we need to be in to be able to win a general election.
It's always good to have some straight talking from a front bencher. You're always straight talking, and thank you. You've been open about your own struggles with mental health. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Gwynne. Now, as Wagatha Christie hits the courts, what political feuds can you remember? David Wooding, the political editor of The Sun on Sunday, will take us through some of his favourites. And the Prime Minister is in Sweden. We'll bring you that press conference live. That's after the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister's chaired the first Cabinet Committee to tackle the cost of living amid warnings Britain's on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Millions of renters living in unsafe conditions could have their homes improved under major housing reforms. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove announced the new Renters Reform Bill will be extended to nearly 4.5 million households. The plans will help tenants living in damp, unsafe and cold homes and protect them from eviction notices without reason. The Prime Minister will sign historic declarations with Sweden and Finland today to reinforce their security as the two nations consider joining NATO. Boris Johnson arrived in Stockholm this morning and will travel to Finland later. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a re-evaluation in the Nordic countries. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond if they join the military alliance. The former US President Donald Trump could be allowed to rejoin the social media site Twitter. Elon Musk agreed a £34.5 billion takeover bid with the board last month. In an interview, he hinted that Trump could have his ban reversed after he was removed from the platform in January of last year. At the time, Twitter said his account was permanently suspended due to the risk of further incitement of violence following riots in Washington. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Gloria with the briefing.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, many of us are gripped by the Wagatha Christie case being heard in court, with footballer's wife Rebecca Vardy suing footballer's wife Colin Rooney for libel. This might be wag-on-wag warfare, but what about internal political feuds in Westminster? I'm delighted to be joined by The Sun on Sunday's political editor, David Wooding, to go through some of his favourites. And we are going to start... Well, I'm going to start by welcoming you, David. It's nice to see you. And we would like to start with your one of your choices. We're going to start, though, with Blair and Brown. Why did you choose that one?
Well, this was the one that I lived through 25 years ago, since Tony Blair came to power in that wonderful day, May Day election, where we had the change of government for the first time in 18 years. But little did we all know at the time, apart from those who were really well connected, that there was a lot of friction between the new Prime Minister and his Chancellor, Gordon Brown, because they'd both apparently agreed a pact that Gordon Brown would take over the premiership after a year or two of Tony Blair. But of course, Tony Blair went on to win 3 elections, and the friction between the two got worse as time went on. And there were briefing wars galore. The little pub down the road just there, the Red Lion, we used to go in there for a drink knowing that we'd bump into one or other of the teams from either the Chancellor or Number 10, and be given all sorts of intriguing information about their opponent. And every time, of course, you asked about this officially, it was denied. But it was known locally as the TBGBs because of TB for Tony Blair and GB for Gordon Brown. I remember once, Gloria, going for lunch with a very senior political figure who was quite a big, influential person. I won't name who it was. And he agreed to meet me for breakfast at 8 in the morning. And when we sat down, I met him for the first time, shook his hand and said, "Hello, nice to meet you. How are you?" He said, "Awful," he said. "Gordon Brown is being beastly again." He didn't use the word beastly, he used something far more colourful. And he went straight into a tirade about Gordon Brown, which gave me a great story for that day's paper. So that shows you the level of feuding between the two times at the side. Of course, they both went on to be a great pair, and Gordon Brown did become Prime Minister one day.
Also shows that sometimes, just occasionally, it is worth political journalists going for a breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. I avoided them like the plague. Sorry, David, I hope you can hear me. Right, we're now going to move over to the Conservatives. Geoffrey Howe and Margaret Thatcher. Tell us about that.
Yes, I mean, this was Geoffrey Howe was the Chancellor again. It was the Chancellor versus the Prime Minister, and again there was all friction between those two. I wasn't there at the time, but you remember Geoffrey Howe resigning and making that amazing speech in the Commons, which led to the beginning of the end of Margaret Thatcher. And of course, she has her own feud, of course, with Ted Heath, who managed to sulk from the backbenches for many, many years, attacking her, and it became known as the longest sulk in political history. So again, like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, Margaret Thatcher had her detractors, and she managed to survive and win 3 general elections as well. So perhaps, Gloria, a feud isn't such a bad thing. Perhaps it inspires leaders to go on to greater things.
Well, you say a feud is no bad thing, but I was in Parliament when the Miliband brothers. Tell us why you've chosen that one. I voted for David, by the way. Didn't work.
You're coming through very faintly here, Gloria, I'm afraid.
The Miliband brothers, which I had the pleasure of serving in Parliament during that one.
The Milibands, well, of course, they were. I mean, that was a peculiar one. It was one we didn't write about a lot. We knew there was a lot of friction or rivalry between these two brothers. It was never spoken about. They were both special advisors in their own departments. Ed Miliband, of course, in Gordon Brown's camp, and David Miliband more clearly in Tony Blair's camp, and that probably the feud between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor probably led to a feud between the SPADs, the special advisors, and in this case between 2 special advisors who happened to be brothers as well. They were both seen as, they both got into the cabinet. David Miliband becoming Education Secretary, and Ed Miliband was Climate Change and Energy Secretary, and the feuding went on a little bit behind the scenes again there. Again, it was all very much kept under the surface, but it all came to a head when it came to the leadership election, and Ed Miliband in fact pipped his big brother for the job and snatched the crown off his head because David Miliband was seen as the successor for the Labour Party crown and didn't get it. Of course, he's now left the country, and I think their rivalry, the sibling rivalry and political rivalry merged together in a toxic mix, caused a lot of upset inside the family.
And one other that you chose is taking us a little bit further back in history, so you can teach me and all the viewers about this too. Bevan and Herbert Morrison.
Yes, even I wasn't born then, Gloria, but it was in the 1930s when Clement Attlee was re-elected as interim leader of the Labour Party, which had run through a difficult time with an extremely left-wing leader before, and Ernest Bevin was backing Clem Attlee along, and had a big rivalry with other members of the party. One of them was Herbert Morrison, in fact, the grandfather of Peter Mandelson, who became a major figure in New Labour. And when he backed Herbert Morrison, when he effectively knifed Herbert Morrison and gave the crown to Clem Attlee, Herbert Morrison was heard to say, "I think sometimes I'm my own worst enemy," to which Ernie Bevin replied, "Not while I'm still alive, you're not."
Good one. Finally, I've picked one that you didn't pick. So I'm going to put you on the spot on this one, but I just wanted to show that actually politics isn't just about men fighting. One feud that nearly did end up in the courts, but didn't, Emily Thornberry and Caroline Flint.
Who and Caroline Flint? Sorry, the line's really bad here.
Emily Thornberry and Caroline Flint had quite a spat over Brexit.
Oh, yes. Yes, Brexit. Now, of course, Brexit was the fuel, the rocket fuel for all feuds. I mean, being in that place over the road for the last 6 years has been incredible. Feuds galore, even within the Conservative Party. You talk about the Labour Party. The Labour Party had it less than the Conservative Party because there were more on the Brexit side. But you did get a sizable rump of people in the Labour Party, Caroline Flint being one of them, and Kate Hoey and others who were all pro-Brexit. Sometimes these people were exercised by their own constituency and representing what their own voters wanted. But of course the Labour Party was very clearly behind Remain, and that did lead to some nasty going-ons there and briefings against people. Yes, definitely.
I've got the scars on my back, David. Great fun. Thank you for the history lesson. Come back and talk to us again soon.
Pleasure.
Thank you, David Wooding, political editor of The Sun on Sunday. Now, costs are soaring. We're all noticing. The government says it is tackling the challenge at the heart.
Thank you. The line was really shocking, so I hope it made sense.
Prince Charles laid out in the Queen's speech yesterday. But a particular phrase dropped by the Prime Minister in the debate afterwards has gained a good deal of attention. Mr Johnson said he and the Chancellor would be saying more. Forgive me, we can cross live to Stockholm to the press conference where the Prime Minister...
Thank you. To Harpsund. I'm very happy to have you here. And our countries have strong ties, and I value our cooperation and close relations. And there is a mutual desire to deepen our cooperation, not at least on foreign security and defence policy, but also on trade and research, just to name a few areas. And in times of crisis, cooperation becomes even more important, and this applies not least for our international defence partnerships. And Sweden's partnerships with the UK and with NATO have been crucial during these exceptional times. And I greatly appreciate the strong support your government has expressed for our security and our right to make our own security policy choices. And today, we are taking another step to strengthening our bilateral defence and security cooperation at the strategic level. And I'm very happy that you have come here today for the signing of our bilateral political declaration of solidarity. And the Prime Minister and I have agreed to face challenges in peace, crisis and conflict together. And if either country should suffer a disaster or an attack, the United Kingdom and Sweden will assist each other in a variety of ways. The support will be given on request from the affected country and may include military resources. The declaration serves a crucial purpose regardless of the choices Sweden will make in terms of our security policy in the future. And President Putin thought he could cause division, but he has achieved the opposite. We stand here today, more united than ever, and with the ambition of strengthening our bonds even more. And the Russian aggression against Ukraine has been met with incredible bravery from the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian leaders, but also by a unanimous condemnation and firm response from the entire transatlantic community and beyond. And I look forward to continuing our close cooperation and our bilateral relations, but also on robust actions to put pressure on Russia and in support of Ukraine. So please, Boris, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister Anderson. Thank you, Magdalena. And thank you for having me your absolutely beautiful Harpsund retreat. Breathtaking and great to be back in Sweden and great to see you again. This week, many of us have been paying tribute to the brave men and women who secured victory and peace in Europe 77 years ago. And so it's a sad irony that we've been forced to discuss how best to fortify our shared defences against the empty conceit of a 21st century tyrant. When Europe celebrated VE Day in 1945, a victory that was, of course, in no small part ensured by the heroism of the Russian people, we hoped that peace on our continent would endure. Well, Putin's bloodthirsty campaign against a sovereign nation has put an end to to that hope. And we face a new reality, but one that we face together. Throughout this conflict, our Nordic partners have been leading international support, not just for Ukraine, but also for European security. From sending defensive weapons and equipment to bringing together international partners and standing shoulder to shoulder with us in the UN, the Human Rights Council, the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation. So I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Andersson, to sign this Mutual Security Assurances Declaration. It's an agreement that brings our two countries even closer together. It will allow us to share more intelligence, bolster our military exercises, and further our joint development of technology. The many carcasses of Russian tanks that now litter the fields and streets of Ukraine, thanks to Swedish-developed and British-built NLAWs, certainly speak to how effective that cooperation can be. But most importantly, this is an agreement that enshrines the values that both Sweden and the UK hold dear, and which we will not hesitate to defend. And as you put it so well, Magdalena, when we were out on the lake, we are now literally and metaphorically in the same boat. Thank you all very much. I think we're going to go to the media now.
Good afternoon, James Landale, BBC. Prime Minister Johnson first. Can you spell out very precisely for us what this mutual security agreement actually means of practice? If Russia were to attack Sweden, what would the UK do? And secondly, if I may, is now really the time to have a fight with European allies over the Northern Ireland Protocol at the height of this crisis? And Prime Minister Andersson, if I may, can you give us your assessment of the threat against your country from Russia, and what response you might expect from Moscow if Sweden were to apply to join the NATO military alliance?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, James. First of all, let's be clear that the friendship and the relationship between Britain and Sweden is decades old, and what we're saying and doing now is, in some ways, no more than a statement of the obvious, that two liberal democracies faced with an attack upon one of the other would want to come to each other's support. And whether it's in the event of a disaster or a military attack, what we're saying today is that upon request from the other party, we would come to the other party's assistance. And it's vital to state that, I think, now ever more important to state that now in the grim circumstances in which we find ourselves with the Russian attack on Ukraine. But it's also, I think, an important step forward, because this is an agreement on which we together intend to build, whether it's in sharing intelligence or working together to combat cyber attacks, whether it's working together in defence procurement or doing more joint exercises together. We're in the JEF, in the Joint Expeditionary Force, or any other forum. Sweden and the UK intend to do much more together, and I think the NLAW missile system really incarnates the kind of closeness that we see in our relationship. And that's what this is intended to underpin. It's the foundation stone, I believe, for an important development in our relationship. And on the protocol, you've all heard me say this many times. The most important agreement is the 25-year-old Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That is crucial for the stability of our country, of the UK, of Northern Ireland, and that means that things have got to command cross-community support. Plainly, the Northern Ireland Protocol fails to do that, and we need to sort it out.
When it comes to threats from Russia, I mean, the tensions in this part of Europe and around the Baltic Sea has increased during the last years, given Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, also before the 24th of February, also the military buildup of Russia, and also a more aggressive rhetoric from Russia. And of course, after the 24th of February, tensions are even stronger or more difficult than before. And of course, looking at the Russian military forces right now, they are rather occupied in Ukraine. If Sweden decides to send in an application to join NATO, Russia has said that they will respond, but then exactly how they will respond is unclear. They have said that they will increase their military presence in this region if Sweden and or Finland sends in an application.
Hello, my name is Ulf Ambreus Bonnevie from Swedish television. Mr. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the question here in Sweden is what kind of aid can we expect if we were to be attacked in any way during the transition process until a full membership in NATO? Can you be a little bit more concrete on what type of aid you will be sending, if so? Will you send troops to Sweden, for instance? And to Magdalena Andersson, how safe can we feel today compared to yesterday after this agreement that you signed today? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I think the declaration really makes it clear. It's upon request of of Sweden, the UK will of course provide assistance. But what matters primarily is what Sweden decides to request. Or what we're saying is that we are long-standing friends of Sweden. We're massive partners and supporters of Sweden. We share the same ideals, the same values. Sometimes things should go without saying, but they're worth saying. It's worth emphasising that if Sweden were attacked and looked to us for help and support, then we would provide it. But it's up to Sweden to make the request and to spell out exactly what support is requested.
So are we safer with this declaration? Yes, we are. Of course, this means something, and this is important, whatever security policy choice that we will make in Sweden. If we want to join NATO, if we decide to keep outside NATO, this is an important joint declaration. But what is maybe even more important, is the fact that the Prime Minister is so engaged in the security of the northern part of Europe, and you have taken such an active role in this area. And we are very grateful for that, and that you're so clear that we share the same values and we stand together.
Good afternoon, Nina Lloyd from the Press Association. Firstly, a question for both Prime Minister Johnson and Prime Minister Andersson. Will this declaration help Sweden, should it decide to apply to NATO, in the period after application but before accession, so-called grey zone, and how? And secondly, Prime Minister Johnson, the leader of the opposition, has said this week he would do the right thing and resign if he's fined over allegations of lockdown rule breaking. Do you think that's the right thing to do? And are you acting dishonourably by staying in number 10?
Well, can I just say first on your question about Sweden and Sweden's security, there's a separate conversation going on here in Sweden, which I don't want to get into. It's a matter for Sweden. But what we're saying is, and about Sweden's future relationship with NATO, that's a matter for Sweden. But what we are saying emphatically is that in the event of a disaster or the event of an attack upon Sweden, then the UK would come to the assistance of Sweden with whatever Sweden requested. And we hope that that's a useful and important thing to say. And it's certainly, we regard it in the UK as important for us that Sweden is saying the same thing to us. And this is a mutual agreement that I think is an important stepping stone, paving stone, as I said, for developing our relations in the future. And on your second question, I think well, we're trying to move beyond all that, and I think we're trying to focus on the issues that really matter, not least the war in Ukraine.
I think as I said, I think this declaration is important, whatever security policy choice Sweden will make for the future. But of course, we are right now exploring different options, and there are also discussions in Parliament between the government and all political parties in Parliament. And of course, we are exploring all possible options, and NATO is one of them that is on the table. And during this process, we have therefore had discussions with several countries on how they see this grey period from a potential application until we're fully members. And there we've got reassurances from several countries. I'm here with Boris Johnson today. I had a press conference with Olaf Scholz last week, and I also had our foreign minister in Washington last week.
TV4. Mr. Boris Johnson, how strong is this declaration of solidarity compared to NATO's Article 5? Would you, for example, assist Sweden with nuclear weapons in the case of war? And what have Sweden in turn promised the UK for this declaration? Will this declaration hold even if we do not join NATO, for example, or do we promise something else?
Yeah, I think that's the really good question, because I think that in a way this declaration is something that is about the UK and Sweden standing together, affirming our friendship and our partnership and our willingness to come to each other's defence and support. That's what it is. I think there's a separate issue about NATO, which I think Sweden is going to be addressing in the course of the next few days. That's not for me to comment upon, except of course to say that I'm sure the UK will support whatever course of action Sweden decides to embark upon, and we'll be as useful and supportive as we can. This is, I think, this is about our joint decision to show that we will support and defend each other. Now, when it comes to our deterrent, our nuclear deterrent, that's something we don't generally comment upon. But what I've made clear is that it's up to either party to make a request, and we take it very seriously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you